I discovered my family was using my name to take out loans, all because of my brother's kids. Growing up, my brother Isaac was the golden child. I don't mean in the typical way parents show a little more favoritism towards one child over the other. No, this was extreme. Isaac could do no wrong, no matter what. My parents would bend over backward to make his life as easy as possible. Meanwhile, I had to fight tooth and nail for everything I got. The contrast was so stark it felt almost surreal, like I was living in some twisted version of a family sitcom, where the narrative wasn't about love or fairness, but about making sure one child never faced any real hardship. Let me break it down. Isaac flunked out of college, and, instead of facing the consequences, my parents paid for him to go to another school. When he totaled his car because he was driving like a reckless idiot, they didn't even blink within a week. They bought him a new one. Meanwhile, I worked my ass off to get into college, paid for most of it through scholarships, and took out loans to make up the difference. And if I got anything less than straight A's, I'd be treated like I had committed some unspeakable crime. The worst part, if anyone family, or friends, acquaintances mentioned the obvious favoritism, my parents would get defensive and somehow make me feel like it was my fault for causing problems in the family. Classic. After college, where I had put in all that effort, Isaac married Nora, his high school sweetheart. They were perfect for each other. Both of them expected everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. Nora was just like Isaac, entitled, demanding, and losing her mind when things didn't go exactly as planned. They had 2 kids, and as much as I loved my niece and nephew, they became the perfect excuse for my parents to keep pouring resources into Isaac's life. The kids need it, they'd say, anytime I dared point out the inequality. And that's where the problem started to escalate. Isaac and Nora bought a house in one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions. You know, the ones massive, way too expensive, way beyond their means. It was literally a financial disaster waiting to happen. They were one missed paycheck away from complete ruin, but they didn't care. They wanted the appearance of success, not the actual financial stability. Meanwhile, I was living in a shitty apartment with 2 roommates, working my ass off at a soul-crushing finance job. I made decent money, but it had me working 60+ hours a week. I was exhausted, eating cheap ramen, and only had enough energy to pass out in my bed at the end of the night, just to do it all over again the next day. For 3 years, I lived like this. No fun, no dating, no luxuries. I drove my old beat-up Toyota, and my co-workers thought I was weird because I brought the same peanut butter sandwich to work every day instead of buying takeout like everyone else. But I had a goal. I wanted to buy my own house, not rent. I wanted to own my place, and not just any place. I wanted a solid, decent home in a good neighborhood. After those 3 brutal years, I finally saved enough money to start house hunting. I found this modest 3-bedroom house with a good backyard in an okay neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but the construction was solid, and it had good schools nearby. Not that I had kids, but it would be good for resale value. The previous owners had kept it well, and it only needed a few minor updates. But throughout the whole process, my parents never offered to help, not 1 cent. They never offered to co-sign or even come with me to look at houses. When I asked Dad if he'd come with me, he just shrugged and said, "Houses are a money pit," before going back to watching TV. When I finally closed on the place, I was so proud of myself. I had done it. I had achieved something big, completely on my own. I invited my family over for a small housewarming party, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd acknowledge what I'd accomplished. Dad walked in, looked around for a moment, and pointed out a small crack in the drywall by the door. "Did you have the foundation checked?" he asked. Mom didn't even say congratulations. She immediately asked when the guest room would be ready for them. Isaac walked around, taking it all in, and said, "It's cozy," in a tone that clearly meant small. But you know what? I didn't care. It was my house, and I was proud of it. I spent weekends fixing it up, painting rooms, learning how to replace a garbage disposal from YouTube videos, and building a small deck in the backyard by myself last summer. The house became my project, my sanctuary. Meanwhile, Isaac and Nora were struggling to keep up with their mortgage, but they kept pretending everything was fine. They'd throw lavish barbecues, buy new furniture they couldn't afford, and my parents would bail them out every time things got tight paying their car insurance. or loaning them money that would never be repaid. And at every family dinner, I'd sit there, listening to them talk about Isaac's job prospects or the kids' activities, while nobody bothered to ask about my promotion or the kitchen renovation I'd just finished. It wasn't until a couple of months ago that things really took a turn. Isaac lost his job. He was working as a sales manager, making decent money, but not enough to support their lifestyle. According to him, the company was restructuring and his entire department was cut. According to a buddy of mine who worked there, Isaac had been on thin ice for months. Either way, he couldn't make their mortgage payments. They missed 1 month, then another, and finally, after missing 3 months of payments, foreclosure was looming. My parents stepped in, but it became clear even they couldn't keep up with Isaac's massive house payment, plus all of their other bills. Isaac and Nora were freaking out, but they wouldn't consider downsizing or selling their house. They kept waiting for a miracle to save them. That's when my parents cooked up their plan, and everything went from typical family nonsense to straight-up insanity. To be continued. A couple of months ago, my parents called me over for dinner, which wasn't unusual. They do this every few weeks, Mum deciding she hadn't gotten enough of criticizing my life choices in person. It was a regular thing, but something felt off this time. The minute I walked in, I could sense that something was different. Mum had made my favorite meal, something she only did when she was trying to butter me up. Dad was unusually nice, actually asking about my work, which was strange because usually he just nodded along, barely paying attention. Isaac and Nora finally showed up, looking stressed, but trying to mask it. I knew something was going on, but I didn't know what. Dinner started normally, but the tension in the air was palpable. Then, halfway through the meal, Dad cleared his throat, looked me dead in the eye, and dropped the bombshell. He said, "Since Isaac has kids and you don't, I think you should give him your house. It makes sense." I literally stopped chewing. My fork hovered in midair, and I sat there, unable to process what I had just heard. My mother shot me one of those smiles, the kind she always gives when she knows she's about to manipulate me into doing something. "You're young, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "You don't have a family to worry about. You can always get another house." I felt like the room had tilted. I blinked a few times, trying to wrap my head around what was happening. Give my house to Isaac, just like that, no discussion. I looked at Isaac and Nora. They were staring at their plates, avoiding eye contact. They were in on this. I couldn't believe it. My parents were sitting there, as if it was the most normal thing in the world, asking me to hand over my home, the one thing I had worked so hard for, to my brother who had never worked for a damn thing in his life. I said, no. It was simple, to the point. I couldn't believe I even had to say it, but I said it anyway. The atmosphere in the room dropped by about 20 degrees. My mother's smile faded instantly. Dad's face turned hard, and Isaac and Nora exchanged a look. It was a mix of panic and anger, and I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. My mum took a sip of her water, then, in the most chillingly calm voice, said, "Then we'll just take it another way." I froze. What the hell was that supposed to mean? The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Before I could even ask for clarification, my dad waved his hand dismissively and said, "Forget it. Just think about it." I left right after that, feeling like I had just been threatened by my own parents. The whole thing felt like a bad dream, but I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that they were capable of something much worse. When I got home, I double-checked that all of my important documents were locked up in my fireproof safe. I had a paranoid gut feeling that something was about to go down. It seemed crazy, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the warning signs. I texted my buddy Ian, who's been my sounding board for family drama for years. I gave him a quick rundown of what had happened, asking if I was losing my mind. His response was blunt, "Dude, your family is nuts. Change your locks." I laughed it off, thinking Ian was just being dramatic. But the more I thought about my mum's cryptic words, the more unsettled I became. What did she mean by "take it another way"? It sounded like a thinly veiled threat, but I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just typical manipulative behavior from her. 1 week after that dinner, I dragged myself to work. I hadn't slept well, and I was exhausted. Around 10 a.m. my phone rang. It was the bank. That alone was strange. They never call unless there's an issue. I picked up, and a woman introduced herself as Melissa from the mortgage department. She asked if she could confirm some details about my mortgage refinance application. I froze. "What?" I said, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. She explained that a request had been made to refinance my mortgage that morning. The request had been submitted under my name, but there were inconsistencies in the documents, and it had flagged their security system. I immediately told her I hadn't applied for any refinance. I was perfectly happy with my current mortgage. She told me that someone had submitted it, and that was when my stomach dropped. I rushed to the bank, knowing something was off. I asked to speak with someone from the mortgage department about potential fraud. A loan officer pulled up the paperwork on his computer and showed it to me. My blood ran cold. There it was, a complete mortgage refinance application in my name. All of my personal information, social security number, birth date, income details was there. But here's the kicker. The new mortgage would have been in both my name and my parents' names as co-owners. They had tried to forge my signature. I felt a surge of rage as I looked at the documents. They had used old paperwork of mine, stuff I had left at their house years ago, after college, as templates to fill out the application. The loan officer pointed out the mismatched signatures and incorrect email addresses. If the bank's security system hadn't caught the inconsistencies, they might have actually succeeded in stealing my house. I was beyond furious. I asked for printed copies of all the fraudulent documents and had them note in their system that I hadn't authorized any of this. As I stood there in the bank, I called my mom on speakerphone so the loan officer could hear the conversation. "You tried to steal my house," I said, my voice shaking with anger. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then, my mother's response made my blood boil. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, as if this was no big deal. "Dramatic? You committed fraud. That's illegal. Like, go to jail illegal." Her response was cold. "Oh, relax. We were just trying to help. If you had agreed in the first place, this wouldn't have been necessary." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was minimizing what she had done, what they had both done. I told her I was reporting this, and her voice turned threatening. "You wouldn't do that to your own family," she said. "Watch me." I hung up, my hands trembling with rage, and turned to the loan officer. "Who do I talk to about pressing charges?" He directed me to the bank's fraud department, and they explained that I would need to file a police report. The gravity of the situation hit me in waves. My parents had tried to steal my house, and they were willing to go as far as committing identity theft to get it. I called Ian again, and he went from "your family is nuts" to "holy crap, dude." Lawyer up now. He recommended his cousin, who was an attorney. The weight of everything that had happened, everything they had done, was starting to sink in. The next day, I called in sick to work and met with Derek, Ian's cousin, who was a lawyer. I showed him the forged documents from the bank, and he immediately began preparing a case. I was still processing everything when my phone started blowing up with texts and calls from my parents. Then Isaac joined in. I turned my phone off completely. That night, I went to bed still reeling, but determined to protect what was mine. The next morning, when I checked my security footage, I found my car covered in eggshells and yolk everywhere, and I knew exactly who was behind it. It was only going to get worse from there. I spent the next few hours cleaning up the mess my parents had left on my car and front door. The eggs were so thick, they practically cemented themselves to the paint. I tried to scrub it off, but it wasn't easy. After 2 hours of futile scrubbing, I called a mobile detailing service. They charged me $200 to clean up the mess, but even then, I could still see traces of egg stains if I looked closely. It was infuriating. The situation with my parents felt like it was spiraling out of control, and I was bracing myself for whatever they'd do next. I had already filed a police report for the vandalism, but I wasn't about to let them get away with this. The next day, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I discovered the power had gone out in my house. I thought it was just a regular outage at first, but when I checked the breakers, nothing had tripped. I went outside to see if there was any obvious issue, and sure enough, the lock on my electrical panel had been cut, and the main switch had been flipped off. I called the electric company to confirm that someone had tampered with it, and the response was exactly what I expected. This wasn't just an accident, it was a deliberate act. At that point, I knew for sure that my parents were behind it. It was getting out of hand, and I had to act fast. After everything had settled, I called Derek again, this time to discuss the escalating harassment. He advised me to get a restraining order. I headed straight to his office, where he reviewed everything, including the security footage of my parents and their actions. He agreed that this was clearly intimidation, and he started preparing the necessary paperwork to get a restraining order in place. That night, I stayed at Ian's place. It felt good to have a break from constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. Ian was a great friend. He didn't pry, he just let me vent and watched movies with me until midnight, giving me a sense of normalcy in the midst of everything else. The next morning, when I got back to my house, I was almost expecting to find it burned down or something. That's how twisted my mind had gotten after everything. But instead, what I found was something even worse. A stack of papers shoved under my front door, clearly shoved through the mail slot sometime during the night. I bent down and picked them up, wondering what fresh hell awaited me. I flipped through the papers, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't some legal threat from my parents, like I expected. No, this was far worse. The papers were old psychiatric evaluations from when I was a teenager. They were medical records, detailing a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder. Nothing I hadn't already dealt with before, but seeing them again, especially in the context of what my parents were doing, made my blood run cold. Attached to the records was a note written in my mum's handwriting. It read, "Remember who you really are. Drop this nonsense, or we'll show everyone, including your work." So now, they were threatening to ruin my reputation by sharing outdated medical records from when I was a minor. The level of manipulation was staggering. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My parents had already tried to steal my house, harass me, and now they were resorting to blackmail. It was too much. But I had Derek's help, and I wasn't about to back down, as if everything else wasn't enough. Derek called me that evening with even more devastating news. "We did a background check on your parents," he said. "I think you need to sit down for this." When I arrived at his office, he slid a folder across the table. I opened it and felt my heart stop. Inside was my dad's criminal record. "What the hell is this?" I asked, trying to process what I was seeing. Derek explained that my dad had been arrested in the 90s for tax fraud, and my mum had been caught using someone else's identity to open credit cards. I was in shock. This was news to me, something I had never known about my parents. "There's more," Derek said as he flipped through the folder. "This is a pattern, not just one incident. There are multiple instances of tax fraud and identity theft. And given what they've just tried to pull with your mortgage, this confirms that this is part of a long-running con. My whole life had been a lie. The parents who had lectured me about responsibility and honesty were frauds themselves, criminals." I couldn't believe it. Derek continued, "There's even more. We found some irregularities in their financial records. They're drowning in debt loans from shady lenders, maxed out credit cards, and second and third mortgages on their house. They owe over $300,000 so, and that's just the tip of the iceberg." The ground felt like it had been ripped out from under me. The family I had spent my whole life trying to please, the parents who had always lectured me about doing the right thing, were completely corrupt. It wasn't just about stealing my house anymore. They had been living a lie their entire lives. And then came the final blow. "There's one more thing," Derek said, his voice grave. "We've discovered a loan from 6 years ago in your name. The address on the loan is listed as your parents' house, but the loan itself is entirely in your name. It looks like they've been using your identity for years." I sat there in silence. If my parents had been using my identity for years, how much more damage had they done? Credit cards, loans, tax liabilities, who knew what they had gotten away with? I didn't know what to do. The weight of it all was suffocating. But Derek had a plan. The first step was to freeze my credit to prevent any new accounts from being opened. Then we'd file a police report for the identity theft. I did everything Derek suggested. By the end of the day, I felt mentally exhausted, but at least I had a plan to protect myself. Then, as if everything else hadn't been enough, Ian showed up at my house. He had been worried when I didn't respond to his texts all day, so he came over to check on me. I gave him the short version of what had happened. His reaction: "This is insane." We didn't talk about my family after that. Instead, he ordered pizza, and we watched movies until late at night. The last text I got that night was from Isaac. It was simple: "We need to talk. Meet me at Denny's on Main. It's about Mom and Dad." At that point, I couldn't imagine what could be worse, but I went anyway. When I walked into the Denny's parking lot, I saw Isaac's Subaru. The place was almost empty. It was 10 p.m. on a Tuesday after all. He was sitting at a corner booth, looking rough. "What's this about?" I asked, as I slid into the booth across from him. "Because if you're here to convince me to drop the charges or give up my house, you're wasting both of our time." Isaac sighed, clearly weighed down by something. "It's not that," he said quietly. "I didn't know they actually went through with it, using your name for loans. They talked about it years ago, said they needed to leverage all available resources, or some BS like that. I thought it was just talk." My stomach twisted. "So you knew?" Isaac looked defensive. "Not for sure," he said, his voice trembling. "They mentioned it once or twice, but I told them it was a bad idea." And that was when everything started to fall into place. Isaac was scared, and for good reason. "I had no idea how deep they were in it," Isaac said, looking almost ashamed. "They owe over $100. To loan sharks, dangerous people. One of them even mentioned knowing where my kids go to school. It's bad, but here's the thing. They've also taken loans out in the kids' names. My toddlers. They use their social security numbers to create credit accounts and take out loans in their names." My blood ran cold. I found a folder of documents while I was looking for birth certificates last week. Isaac continued, "I never thought it would be this bad, but now I see it. They're destroying the kids' future too." I didn't know what to say. My niece and nephew were toddlers, and their grandparents were already ruining their credit scores. I couldn't believe it. Isaac explained that their house was already underwater 3 mortgages, at least $200,000 in debt, and bankruptcy wouldn't even solve their problems with the loan sharks. But the shocking revelation didn't stop there. Isaac needed my help, not for my parents, but for his kids. "I need help fixing their credit," he said, his voice trembling. "But I can't let Nora find out about any of this. If she does, she'll leave me. She'll take the kids and go back to her parents' house in Connecticut." I didn't want to help him. He had made his choices. But the kids were innocent. They didn't deserve this. I agreed to help Isaac with their situation, but I made it clear that I wasn't dropping the charges against our parents, and I wasn't giving up my house. Isaac seemed to accept that, but he warned me about one last thing. "Mum's been talking about one last option if everything else fails." Great. Just what I needed to hear. When I got home, I immediately called Derek and filled him in. He advised me to document everything and remain vigilant. Whatever my parents were planning, I needed to be ready for it. That night, I made sure my security system was armed and prepared myself for whatever came next. I could feel it in my bones. This was far from over. I didn't know how much worse things could get, but I was about to find out. After my meeting with Isaac, I couldn't shake the feeling that my parents were still plotting something. Isaac's warning about their last option had me on high alert. I didn't trust them for a second, not after everything they'd done. So, I did what I had to do. I fortified my home. I installed a Ring doorbell, added motion sensor lights around the yard, and double-checked every lock and window. I probably looked like I was preparing for a zombie apocalypse, but in my situation, I couldn't take any chances. It wasn't just my house anymore. It was my peace of mind, my life, and I wasn't going to let them destroy it. The first couple of days went by quietly. I worked from home, keeping my eyes on the security cameras and waiting for something to happen. It felt like the calm before the storm. Nothing out of the ordinary, no suspicious cars, no strange phone calls. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to go down. Then, on the 3rd day, I got an email from Derek. He had received the documents from the loan that had been taken out in my name 6 years ago. My stomach dropped as I opened the email. The evidence was undeniable. My forged signature, my social security number, everything. The loan proceeds had been deposited directly into my parents' account. They hadn't even tried to hide it. What hit me hardest was seeing my mom listed as the co-signer on the loan. She had walked into a bank pretending to be helping her son, when in reality, she was committing fraud. She had knowingly participated in this, and there was no way to deny it anymore. Derek didn't mince words. This is more than just identity theft, he said. This is a pattern. You have everything you need to move forward with formal charges. The evidence is overwhelming. I knew what this meant. If I gave the green light, my parents would likely go to jail. But after everything they'd done trying to steal my house, harass me, blackmail me, I didn't hesitate. I was done protecting them. I sent Derek a simple text, "Do it." That night, as it was getting dark, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I checked the security camera feed and saw my parents' Lexus. My heart began to race. I had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, I felt a chill in my bones. This was it. This was the confrontation I'd been dreading. I texted Derek, "They're here, recording everything." Then I activated the audio recording app on my phone and slipped it into my pocket. I walked to the door, opened it, and found my parents standing there. Mum was the first to speak. "You're really going to do this over a misunderstanding?" She snapped, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "Misunderstanding?" I shot back, unable to keep the anger from my voice. "You stole my identity. You tried to steal my house. Don't act like this is a misunderstanding." Dad stepped forward, jabbing his finger at me. "Lower your voice. We're still your parents. Parents don't steal from their kids," I said, my voice steady but furious. "You gave me nothing but trust issues and therapy bills." In a moment of fury, my dad lunged at me. I thought for a second that he was going to try to physically confront me, but that was when the doorbell rang. Police and a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit had arrived right on time, thanks to Derek's coordination. Mum switched to her innocent act immediately, trying to put on a facade, but the detective wasn't buying it. Dad, realizing the jig was up, actually tried to bolt out the back door, but it was too late. The officers moved in quickly, cuffing both of them and reading them their rights. I stood there, stunned, watching my parents, who had spent my entire life manipulating and controlling me, get led away in handcuffs. Was surreal. They had crossed a line, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. As they were taken away, Mum turned to me with one last desperate plea. "You wouldn't do this to your own mother," she cried. "You did it to yourself," I said, my voice flat, emotionless. I couldn't feel sorry for her anymore. I couldn't feel sorry for any of them. When they were gone, I sat down on the front steps, my heart pounding. It was over, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss, like I had just buried the last part of my family. I felt empty. My phone buzzed. It was Isaac. "Is it done?" I replied with one word, "Yes, they're in custody." About 10 minutes later, Isaac's car pulled into the driveway. He got out, looking as exhausted as I felt. He came over and sat down beside me on the steps. He didn't say anything at first. We just sat there, watching the streetlights flicker on as the night grew darker. "You okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. Isaac let out a bitter laugh. "No, not really." We sat in silence for a while, both of us feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Then, Isaac spoke again. "What happens now?" I took a deep breath. "There'll be a rain tomorrow." I paused, thinking about the long road ahead. "We'll have to file police reports for the kids. Their credit's wrecked. Nora's going to find out. Probably." Isaac nodded, his face drawn. "I don't know how to fix this, but we'll figure it out. The kids deserve a clean slate." The next few days were a blur. The case moved quickly. With the overwhelming evidence working in my favor, my parents tried to fight it. Of course, they blamed me. They blamed Isaac. They blamed the bank for not catching the fraud earlier. None of it worked. They were sentenced to prison. Mom for 3 years and Dad for 5, due to his prior convictions and his role as the mastermind behind everything. Isaac had to fight hard to clear his kids' names from the fraudulent debt, but with the case against our parents, he managed to do it. Nora did leave him, taking the kids back to her parents' house in Connecticut. I can't say I blamed her. She had to protect her kids from the mess they were born into. At least she allowed supervised visits, which was more than I expected. As for me, I kept my house. I installed a full security system and adopted a German shepherd named Rex. He was a perfect guard dog, big, strong, and always alert. I wasn't taking any chances. I haven't spoken to my parents since their sentencing. I'm not sure I ever will. Isaac and I text occasionally, mostly about practical stuff. We'll never be close. There's too much history, too much damage for anything more. I always thought family meant something no matter what. Your parents would have your back, but mine never did. They saw me as a resource to exploit. And when I refused to be used, they tried to destroy me. I don't regret turning them in. Not for a second. Because the truth is, they never even acted like my parents. Not in any meaningful way. So, here I am. I still have my house. I still have my freedom. And in the end, that's a hell of a lot more than they ever gave me.